Some reports are written to close an incident. Others are written to make sure it doesn't get asked about again. The difference usually depends on how easy it is to explain what happened out there and how many people would need to read it. I took that assignment in the southern Utah sector late in the season, which meant fewer visitors but longer patrol distances and more responsibility covering gaps between stations. And by that point, I'd already spent years rotating through different desert units, so the isolation didn't bother me as much as the administrative inconsistencies that sometimes showed up when staffing got thin, because that's when small things start slipping through unnoticed. The station itself sat on a slightly elevated patch of hard ground above a dry wash, with a short gravel turnout that connected to a maintenance road used mostly by supply trucks every couple of weeks. And from the porch you could see miles of open terrain broken only by low sandstone ridges that flattened out toward the horizon. And one of my first habits whenever I arrived somewhere new was to check the logbook, not just for permits but for patterns, how many entries per day, what kinds of routes people were choosing, how accurately they described distances, because those details tell you more about what's happening in an area than any single report. What I noticed that week wasn't volume but repetition. 3 permits filled out in identical handwriting, each listing routes that looked legitimate at a glance but broke down if you actually traced them against the map, cutting through restricted sections that had been closed off years earlier due to unstable terrain and abandoned shafts. And what made it stand out wasn't just that the routes were wrong, but that whoever wrote them knew how to make them look almost correct, like they had access to older maps or had spent time studying the current ones closely enough to mimic them with small, intentional errors. I checked the timestamps on the entries, saw they were spaced across multiple days when the station had been intermittently unstaffed, which meant whoever filled them out either tracked the schedule or came by often enough to know when no one would be there. And that shifted it from a simple mistake to something more deliberate. I logged it during the evening radio check, keeping my tone neutral because we're trained not to escalate without clear cause. And the response I got was measured but not dismissive, just a note to document anything further and flag overdue hikers tied to those permits. But there was a slight delay before the reply came through, like whoever was on the other end had muted the line to check something before answering, and I made a mental note of that without really knowing why. The next morning, I did a routine perimeter walk, checking the storage shed, the water tank levels, and the condition of the generator housing, and that's when I saw the tire tracks crossing the service road, cutting perpendicular to it instead of following it, which is something you don't see unless someone is either lost or intentionally avoiding the main route. And these tracks had a pattern to them, deep impressions at irregular intervals, slight fishtailing in the loose gravel, like the driver had been stopping, adjusting direction, then moving again, not committing to a single path. I followed them only far enough to confirm direction, watching them veer toward a dry wash that led into one of the restricted zones. And I stopped there because protocol is clear about not pursuing unknown off-road activity alone, especially in areas with unstable ground. So I marked the location, took photos, and headed back to the station to log it. The radio didn't connect cleanly that morning, which happens out there depending on atmospheric conditions. So I waited for the next scheduled window. But the delay meant I was sitting with that information longer than usual, replaying the tracks in my head, trying to match them to any legitimate reason someone would be out there, and not coming up with one that held. It was early afternoon when the man approached, coming in from the east, over a low ridge where there isn't any marked access, and I saw him before he saw me, which gave me time to watch how he moved. Steady pace, no visible urgency, but also no signs of fatigue you'd expect from someone covering that kind of distance on foot. And when you got closer, I noticed his boots didn't carry the dust pattern typical for that terrain, like he'd either changed them recently or hadn't walked as far as his approach suggested. He stepped onto the porch without hesitation, glanced briefly at the permit board, and said he needed to confirm a route he'd filed earlier in the week. And when I asked which one, he described one of the incorrect routes almost exactly as it appeared in the log. including the point where it crossed into restricted land. And I told him directly that the route didn't connect the way he thought, that it would lead him into a closed area. And he nodded in a way that didn't read as surprise, more like acknowledgement, then asked if anyone else had filed something similar. That question didn't fit the usual pattern of a visitor trying to correct their plan. It sounded more like he was checking consistency. And I told him there had been similar entries, and he held eye contact just a second longer than normal before saying, "That's good," in a tone that didn't match the words, then turned away without asking for water, directions, or any of the basic things people in that environment usually need. I watched him leave, noting that he didn't follow any established path, just moved in a straight line toward the same general direction as the tire tracks. And for a moment I considered calling it in immediately as suspicious activity, but without a clear violation. It would have stayed in the same category as the permit entries, unusual but not actionable. Later, during the next successful radio check, I reported both the tracks and the contact, getting a description of the individual. And again there was that slight pause before the response, longer this time, followed by instructions that were more specific than usual. Remain at the station, avoid following any off-road leads alone, and document any further contact in detail, which suggested there was context I wasn't being given. As the day moved into evening, the wind picked up across the open ground, carrying fine dust that settled along the base of the building. And I stepped out to secure the shed and check the latch on the fuel storage, and that's when I noticed a second set of footprints near the back of the station, partially overlapping with mine from earlier, but clearly distinct in tread pattern and depth, leading from behind the structure toward the same direction the man had taken. And they hadn't been there during my morning check. I examined them more closely than I probably would have on a normal day, noticing the spacing between steps, the way the heel impressions were deeper than the forefoot, suggesting someone standing and shifting weight rather than just passing through. And the position relative to the back door made it clear they'd been close enough to the building to look inside if they wanted to. I checked the door immediately, found it locked, no damage. But the thin layer of dust along the lower frame had been disturbed in a way that indicated someone had stood there for some time, not just brushed past. Inside, I logged everything with more detail than usual, including measurements and approximate timelines, and kept the radio volume higher than I normally would, letting the static fill the room so any break in it would be noticeable. Sometime after dark, during the scheduled check, I reported the new footprints, and this time the response came back with information that shifted the situation entirely. That there was already an open internal file relayed to similar permit entries across multiple stations in the region, all with matching handwriting characteristics, and that in at least one other case, there had been reports of unauthorized vehicles operating off-road near restricted zones. I asked what the nature of the file was, whether it was tied to illegal access, resource theft, or something else, and the answer was intentionally vague, just that it was being monitored and that field staff should avoid direct engagement. That kind of answer doesn't happen unless there's something they're not ready to put into general reporting channels. That night, the environment changed in a way that made everything feel closer. The wind dropped off suddenly, and with it the usual background noise of the desert, leaving a kind of stillness that makes small sounds carry farther. And around 2 a.m. I heard a vehicle engine in the distance, low and uneven, not following the steady pattern of someone driving a known route, but starting and stopping in short intervals, like it was navigating without lights or trying to stay concealed. And I stepped onto the porch, turning off the exterior light to reduce glare, and listened, counting the intervals between engine bursts, trying to estimate distance. But it never approached directly, just moved somewhere beyond the ridgeline where I'd seen the tracks earlier. By morning, the sound was gone, and when I went out to check the perimeter again, there were fresh tire tracks layered over the previous ones, crossing closer to the station before veering away, and new footprints near the porch steps. Same tread as the ones by the back door, positioned in a way that suggested someone had stood there facing the building for a period of time. I documented everything again, took photos, marked coordinates, and when the Dodge replacement Ranger arrived later that day, I walked him through the entire sequence, from the permit entries to the tracks to the contact, and he listened without interrupting, then flipped through the logbook until he found the entries I'd marked. I was just as a big man. I was running for a letter, flying the tables. I wonder if this mental would be faked help. But what I got instead was a condensed summary in the system. Unauthorized permit entries, possible off-road activity, no ongoing threat, and when I asked to review the original permits, I was told they couldn't locate them, which didn't match what I'd seen because I had physically handled those forms, noted their placement, even marked one with a reference tab for follow-up. I requested access to the station logbook as well, and was informed that it had been replaced during routine maintenance, with older pages archived. But when I checked the archive index, the specific pages covering those dates weren't listed at all. What stayed with me more than the missing documents was something smaller, something I almost didn't register at the time, that during my last morning at the station, before the replacement arrived, I had gone out to do one final perimeter check. And in the dust just beyond the edge of the porch, overlapping faintly with the previous night's footprints, there was a partial impression of a boot tread I hadn't seen before, angled differently, deeper on one side, as if the person had been standing there for a long time. And when I followed that impression outward, it didn't lead away from the station like the others. It circled around it, wide at first, then gradually closer, until it merged with the same path that led to the back door, as if whoever had been out there hadn't just approached once, but had spent hours moving around the building, mapping it out in the dark. Long before I ever realized I wasn't the only one keeping track of what was happening there.